Hello, everyone, and welcome to my little lecture on politics. To my friends, I'm known as Eric, but here on social media, I am known as the political demon. Now, to any of y'all who are interested in trying to get involved into politics, or you want to take your chance on running for a county seat or city council, or heck, you want to try your luck on gain a state legislator seat and or a congressional seat, well, you're gonna have to know the one thing that I would advise you all know about, and that is your community. What does your community rely on? What does it rely on economically? What's its culture? What's its wants, needs, its political environment? What how rural or urban it is, its infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But before I get into this, I have to ask, do all of you know political science? Because if you don't know what political science is, I would question your motives as to why you're running for political office. So, to entertain y'all, political science is the study of politics, per se, how the government operates, what policies influence specific communities. It's study of the mindset of political voters and how they behave throughout the centuries. It's a very unique tool to understand how to predict trends as if it was shifting leftwards or rightwards and so on and so forth. So, to start off, I will be using a community as an example to personify what I mean by it. And for starters, for the community I'll be using is the Rio Grande Valley. And the reason why I've chose this is because it has recently become a bit more competitive than usual. And as we all know, new battlegrounds mean new fresh meat for a lot of the parties. But before we get into the Rio Grande Valley, let's us understand the community a bit more. To start off, the Rio Grande Valley is considered the entire southern peninsula of Texas, which is pretty much also known as the border region of Texas between the US-Mexico border, with El Paso being the beginning, being from the left side here in El Paso County, all the way down to Cameron County, with the South Padre Island being the last city at the very tip of the opposite side of El Paso. Bit small, but you can see it. Now the main ca- now culturally they're all the same. They are a bit more aligned on specific issues of like border security. But as a but if we are to base it upon the core communities that are more culturally aligned with the Rio Grande Valley is, it'll be for these four counties. Hidalgo being the biggest of them all, with McAllen consisting a major population of it. Cameron County with Brownsville, Willacy with Raymondville, and Star being Rio Grande City. First off, we will start off with the two biggest counties, which is Hidalgo and Cameron. Now, despite Hidalgo County historically supporting the Democrat nominee on the federal and local levels of government, a few occasions with it has voted Republican only on a few occasions, with Trump being the most recent Republican to win Hidalgo County since 1972. The previous two being 1928 with Herbert Hoover, and two more under Dwight Eisenhower's first and second term. Then you go into Cameron County, where it has also voted for Trump and hasn't voted Republican since George W. Bush's second term. Then we get back, then we get all the way back to back to Reagan's second term. Then we get Richard Nixon's second term. Then we get to Eisenhower's term, and then Herbert Hoover. Then we get the final two counties, Willacy and Starr County. Willacy being a bit more, well, let's just say a bit more sporadic because of its sparse population, I should say. And it hasn't voted Republican since once again, Richard Nixon. Though it hasn't voted for Herbert Hoover, so I guess that makes it a bit more unique for an agricultural county. Then we get Starr County, which, unlike the other three, it hasn't voted Republican since 1892 under Benjamin Harrison when he failed to secure a second term against Grover Cleveland. Ironic if you think about it. But what makes them unique? Why did I choose this community? Well, it's generally because they are known to be very religious culturally. And this is where political science starts to come into play in all this. Because religion is a key terminology when it comes to political science. Because the majority of the time, when someone is very religious, they're pretty conservative. Though when it comes to Catholics, on the other hand, they're pretty liberal to some extent. As you can see within the New England region. But what makes the Rio Grande Valley Catholics different from New England is that they're not as socially liberal as them. Culturally, they are very pro-life. They're very family oriented. They're pretty much the same thing as rural white voters, with the only exception being them being over 90% Latino, majority Mexican, especially Tejanos, Americans who are of Mexican descent, who had family dating back all the way back to the Civil War between Texas and Mexico. They're they're pretty heavily mixed when it comes to Mexican and American cultures, being bilingual in both Spanish and English, and they're known to be very moderate when it comes to border security, depending on the environment. So yeah, if you're looking for the closest thing that comes to a Southern Democrat, which was very socially conservative and very pro oil, this is where you would find what's left of the Southern Democrats. But beliefs has little to play when it comes to politics and Trump winning them because if that were the case, then all the Democrat congressmen there, including the state representatives, would have been gone. So we go deeper into what else they have. Another thing, this goes into the economic sector of them and deals with oil and gas, especially along the Eagle Ford Shale, which employs over 195,000 workers, I should say. Though it's not as significant, though the energy sector isn't as significant as up west, as they only have the gas industries down here, they do make a huge fraction of the Rio Grande Valley's energy and infrastructure sectors, with Webb County relying on oil and gas for 31% of their local tax revenue. Without it, they pretty much just cut off the arm of a major economic body that the Rio Grande Valley is vehemently invested in. Even the congressmen down there are pretty pro oil to an extent. So, what how does this contribute to it? Well, I have to tell you guys, do you guys know anything about the Green New Deal? Because What the Green New Deal does was enforce policies that would push for a more environmentally friendly way. So instead of oil and gas, you would want to enforce solar and wind turbines. You would want, instead of gas powered cars, you would want electric cars like Teslas, though they're not really that big of a fans of them anymore because of, well, politics, and so on and so forth. And considering those solar and wind turbine companies make up 25 to 30,000 jobs, they're still relatively small in Texas. So, if the policy were to go to the Sri Lanka route and just heavily invested into transitioning 100% in the next day or week, it's not going to go well for the energy sector, especially in Texas. Though it's even though Texas does have a somewhat significant wind and solar sector, mainly within some the major parts of San Antonio, it's not enough to help pay for the state's economy and infrastructure compared to oil and gas. As I stated before, it's still relatively small and it has a small workforce, so it may take a while for them to be able to get the work, be able to get the jobs needed to be filled because it requires investments in in this sector to make more jobs. And to go into deeper details, even if they were able to make these jobs, it may make Texas relieve tens of thousands of oil workers because you're going to need more land. And if the Green New Deal were to be enforced benevolently, it's going to be you're going to have to shut down some of the plans to go along with the regulations that it's enforced by. And even if you're able to get many of these sectors open, the oil and gas sector worker would get $120,000 annually, while the wind and solar sectors will get $109,000 annually. So even if it was able to do it, the worker may and is able to get into the workforce with the experience of being an electrician, they're not gonna make the same amount of money as they used to. So to a lot of these oil workers, this was considered a downgrade to a lot of them. And it's not like Amala made it any better. I mean, during in case you guys don't know about Harris, throughout her time as San Francisco's DA, district attorney, or should I say, being the California Attorney General and US Senator, she has been known to be pretty progressive on a lot of these policies, especially on the oil sector. Hell, she was literally the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, the very policy that could destroy the energy sector within Texas. So that is a major reason why they shifted to the right. Though it's not the only major reason why. The agriculture may also take a hit from it. And if many of y'all don't know about the agricultural sector, what you need to know is that the majority of the Rio Grande Valley's agricultural sector deals with cattle and citrus, with the majority of the citrus farms being in Hidalgo, Cameron, and Wilsey, and being this little sector. And then you got the cattle industry all the way up in this sector, being the biggest ones being Brooks, Jim Wells, and Kleberg. Well, right here. Sorry, I was looking at Hong County. The main now the high now this has been very popular when it comes to citrus production because of its subtropical and fertile soil compared to most of the Texas region, fairly which is fairly dry and desert-like. Their major crop includes includes grapefruits, which consist of 67% of the agriculture industry. That is about two-thirds of their economy, with the majority of them going on in Hidalgo. Their main grapefruits would be the Real Star and the Ruby Sweet Red grapefruit, with the remainder being oranges, which consist of almost a third of the agricultural industry. Other citruses that they also grow includes lemons, limes, mandarins, and tangerines. The crops that aren't citrus are a majority of cotton, onion, sorghum, corn, watermelon, sugarcane, and sometimes cabbage. And unlike the oil sector, the Green New Deal could benefit a lot of the agriculture sector as it could boost the farm's resilience of an ever-changing climate when it comes to shiftly, sh- shifting fastly to the cold and shifting fastly to the heat. And it could help reduce runoff. And when you're in a state that is heavily agriculture and oil, that is a blessing to a lot of people because that would mean they will be able to preserve the land from being contaminated from oil or runoff or the runoff's chemicals. But sadly, this is where it starts going downhill from here because when it comes to finding things that are more organic or healthier for you, it's very costly. It faces the cost is due to the new regulations that the Green New Deal would impose in an already highly regulated agricultural industry. And if you know anything about agriculture, you would know that the people don't want to mess up in the one little bit when it comes to feeding their plants or cattle. Because you mess up one recipe in one of the cattle or crops, it could either cause plague or it could pretty much lead to death because they need to adapt. They need to casually be shifted to eat these things. Like do it like 5%, 10%, 12, 15%, maybe 17%. Like you have to do it slowly. If the Green New Deal were to go where the Sri Lanka route, it would pretty much decimate the entire economy down there. And that is not a very good idea when you're trying to sustain yourself during inflation. If that's not bad enough, it would also require the cattle industry to decrease herd size to cut methane production. And if you are a independent farmer and you're told to just pull the herd and just throw it out, who would want that? Like that's just a waste of meat and byproducts, especially when the cow hasn't matured yet. And then you got increased spending on key ingredients for feed and crops. As I stated before, you have to be careful with what you feed your cow and plants. They're so used to the crop, to the ingredients that are in the fertilizer and the feed that you give them, that if you change it abruptly, it could either kill them or or it could get them sick, and it costs money. And if the cost isn't bad enough, you also have to worry about the electric bill because when reaching 50% wind and solar by 2030, it could raise annual electricity bills by 250%, with 100% renewable ballooning costs by nearly tenfold, according to a 2019 study by Texas Public Policy Foundation. And and with all these costs, you're going to have to cut staff. If not now, later. And it could destroy the entire agriculture sector if not planned out properly. But then it has some positives to it, but the underlying negatives of it does not match to what the final reason as to why they have become more friendly to Republican. And that is because of border security. Here what you're seeing here is the historic crossings of undocumented immigrants or illegals if you want to be if I want. Well, I'm just going to use illegal because undocumented is a mouthful. As I stated before, this is a chart of historical illegal crossings along the US southern border since the 2000s. And as you can see, during the Bush administration, the border crossings were very sporadic, you could say. And then under Obama, surprisingly for a Democrat, he actually was pretty stern on border security, and his economy was actually pretty well. Then we hit Trump, and then we hit Trump, it starts decreasing a bit more compared to Obama's term, with a recent spike in 2019, then gradually decreasing after his remain in Mexico policy, and then COVID hit, and then honestly, I thought it would have decreased a lot lower than that before COVID, during COVID in February in 2020. But then we hit the Biden administration, and it's lovely numbers that are a lot higher than Bush's. Then we get to when Trump gets into office, and then it reaches record low illegal immigration. So as I stated before, the border communities is pretty moderate on border security to be. They can be very conservative on it if the economy does not go well for them. Now, the reason why a lot of them would be moderate on it is because of a few things. One, it would help them garner extra labor within the agriculture industry. Because if you remember the situation, the Alabama banning illegal immigrants in their labor sectors in 2011, you start realize they start losing 40 to 70% of their crops afterwards. So I think that's what Speaker Nancy Pelosi was talking about, how how they can't ship the immigrants up here to a place like New York. They need to be back in the South and help pick the crops because the agriculture industry doesn't have enough bodies down there to help them pick them. Another contribution to it would have been the sales tax revenue. So they will be investing in the sales tax from grocery stores, the gas stations, and so on. It also would able to be they would also be able to boost the local economy with with a recent estimate in 2019. Latino households in the Rio Grande Valley, both legal and illegal, earn about $19.1 billion, contributing 4.3 billion to taxes and retaining $14.8 billion in spending power to help support small businesses, retail, and housing markets. And this would keep the local economy vibrant. So, if you want to know why they didn't shift it further right during the time of Obama, that's your reason. They had nothing to complain about. They were able to be economically sustainable with the immigrants being here, with the immigrants, legal or illegal, or work visas. But then, but then comes the downturn of what happened in 2024. Why they all of a sudden went to Trump by heavy margins. By, well, I wouldn't say heavy, I would say lean margins. But it's still Republican friendly as a whole. And the main reason why is because it would strain resources. And to many of you who don't know about the Rio Grande Valley, their resident about 25 to 30% of the Rio Grande Valley residents are below the poverty line, which is below $30,000 annually, and significantly higher than Texas as a whole, which is 14%. And this would mean that their schools will be vastly underfunded because they're not able to afford it, a lot of the things that a school like in Conroe would be able to afford. And when you have overcrowding occurring up there, it strangles the resources in public schools. For example, a Hidalgo County has a history of enrolling thousands of children mid-year, with Texas footing a $4 billion annual bill for educating undocumented kids statewide, according to the Federation for American Immigration Reform of 2022. and the residents contribute 60% of their school budgets through property taxes alone. So when you hear people tell you that they're not influencing property taxes or mortgages increases, they're 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 being disingenuous because at some point the county officials are going to have to raise the prices to accommodate this constant spending. And at some point they're either going to have to close down the school to save money or they're going to have to cut funding from it. And sometimes this funding is detrimental to a lot of these educators. I mean, heck, some of these teachers may be fired because they're not able to sustain them to help teach the undocumented children. And if that hasn't bad enough, hospitals also take a toll, with McAllen's South Texas health system logging $120 million in uncompensated care in 2019, much from illegals not being able to pay for it. Th- This included this included thinning out emergency services like Border Patrol. Their calls to for Border Patrol calls to strain county sheriffs, costing Starr County $1.5 million yearly for overtime, per 2022 estimate. So a county sheriff is going to have to get these Border Patrol agents to do their jobs, and if they're understaffed, they're going to have to do overtime, and sometimes they can't afford overtime. All this because of overpopulation, the overflow of illegal immigration. And if you think the times of Bush was bad, think about what the economy is going through in the Rio Grande Valley under Biden. Like, this is bad stuff. It would pretty much exemplify why the Rio Grande Valley got a bit more competitive in that area, why someone like Myra Flores and Monica de la Cruz was able to win those congressional districts because the community is facing the burden of illegal immigration. And if that isn't and if the toll for education and hospitals aren't bad enough, you can't even the basic necessity like water is tearing faster due to the population spikes. Infrastructure as a whole is bec- getting destroyed, tearing down bit by bit faster with every single population spike. And in doing so, it also causes lower wages. And that's something I have gone frustrated with a lot of these progressives not talk who are far left when it comes to immigrant rights. When I hear people like Dalia Ramirez and Alexandria Ocasio Cortez talk about workers' rights and illegal immigrants' lives matter, they completely disregard how illegals dominate low skill sector, how they completely cause the labor gap. They completely I should word it some other way. The point I'm trying to make is that illegals dominate low skill sectors like agriculture and construction. Yes, that point is true. That they need to be filled out. We need workers to help us fill out those gaps to meet up the demands. But it also depresses wages. That's the part they leave out. I'm having a hard time wording it because it's been a known thing for decades, and you have immigrant right groups that don't mention this because if they mention this, it would completely dismantle their entire point of allowing illegal immigration. Like, it'd be fine if it was like Obama or Trump numbers, but they never mention a damn thing about it when you reach Biden Biden numbers. According to a 2016 study by George Borjas, estimated a 3 to 5% wage drop for native low-skill workers per 10% increase in immigrant labor supply. So, and in that it and so it would create more and more competition because as much as people don't want to talk about it, illegals they make lower wages. They don't have as much of a bargaining power as a native born American because they they don't have the bargaining power. They can't even speak proper English in some cases. And in some cases, when you don't know the language of the country, you're bound to get screwed over by scammers, which is why I have had a terrible time seeing young Mexican children not being able to know English. Because what happens when they get older? Because you have scammers that will literally try to scam people that have limited knowledge of specific sections. It's crazy stuff. And then you got, and if that isn't bad enough, it increases competition. It, as the illegals will take up the job market for the native born Americans because what company would want to pay a native born American $5 extra if they can get an illegal that'll pay $10 less? Now I know it's saying it may seem over exaggerated, but they do get paid less. And it's exploited by these companies. It strains public resources in already struggling communities. According to a 2006 Texas Comptroller report, estimates that illegals cost Texas $1.16 billion in services and contribute $1.58 billion in in revenue. But local governments face the uncompensated burden of $1.4 billion. So even if the federal government does bring in new jobs from these people, the local governments get the biggest burden because they're not going to be able to afford it. They don't have the money. And at some point, they're going to have to increase the revenue. They're going to have to increase taxes. And to the Republican majority in Texas, they don't want to do that. If they do that, that'll be politically toxic to them. It's basic economics is a struggling game based upon populations, which is why you see cities that are constantly struggling economically. A bigger population means a bigger demand, bigger investments, bigger everything. It's strange stuff, I know. So that leads. So we know the main problems that they have and what they rely on, what their environment is, what their economy is like. So why the sudden change? Why did they all of a sudden voted for Trump after what after what 4 5 decades of Democrat officials of voting Democrat for the presidential election and centuries worth of being run by Democrats since it became a state in Texas, became the state in the United States of America? Well, there's a few factors into this. For one, was Trump's border wall policy. Now, a lot of people thought the border wall was going to be a personification of him wanting to deport everyone, deporting their abuelas, even, though I will say for some of them, they'll probably be a net benefit for them. And then, so, but overall, the Trump did incentivize a lot of these construction companies like Bernard Construction and Fisher Industries to hire about 1 to 2,000 workers to build the wall by 2020. So a lot of these workers, they did from get the jobs from it, but they remain hesitant from him. And the border wall construction wasn't incentivized by a lot of these communities to work with until 2019 when there was a immigration spike here. And in response, Trump proposed the Remain in Mexico policy or the Migrant Protection Protocol, in which would make illegals wait wait their legal process in Mexico to reduce the economic strain in the border communities. And to a lot of people, it would be substantial and supported by a lot of these communities, but it was but there were two other things that made the community started to feel resonating among him. And that was his influence in getting more ICE agents, the mainly mainly in the Department of Enforcement and Removed Operations, or ERO, with hiring about 6,000 agents. Though the original proposal was 10,000, I and that ICE was only able to get 6,000 with 1.2 1,200 workers in all other sectors. It did benefit a lot for a lot of these communities, a lot of these families that weren't able to get a job before, a lot of these new workers that are coming into the workforce. They are starting to become more economically successful being able to get a job from it. Though though a small population, it meant a lot to those families. The second part was his investment in getting more immigration judges to enact border security and remain in Mexico policies. So in short, he pretty much increased the immigration judge workforce by 50% by January of 2020, with 2017 consisting of 306 immigration judges to 465 in 2020. And because of the increase in border security staff and immigration and and over 100 immigration judges being added, they were able to process the immigrants a lot faster, to, to deport them, to let them into the country, to allow visas. It pretty much became much more efficient, to say the least. Hence why, and since then they started to become more reminiscent of some of his policies. Here we have the here we have two elections that occurred with McCain, with the age before Trump, with Obama winning his first term. Though he did not win Texas, he still garnered a major support among the major Rio Grande Valley counties. Then in 2016, Trump was able to flip at least one of these counties to his favor. Then in 2020, he was able to flip a few more, with Zapata being the most noticeable to a lot of these people, as it voted Democrat for decades. And then we hit 2024, where you pretty much just see a light red just going along the border communities, with the only four that not voting Republican being these four right here. And this pretty much solidified the fact that Trump's border policies did resonate greatly among these communities. They remember what his immigration policies were like. They remember what his economy was like. They saw it as an economic boon to a lot of these communities. And if you haven't noticed, between 2024 and 2008, you notice that with Trump causing a lot of the major shifts within the suburban counties of the greater Dallas, Austin, and Houston area, you know he garnered major support among the Rio Grande Valley, even having even more support among among the voter base in Texas, with McCain winning 11.8 to Trump's 13.6. So that pretty much goes to show that the suburbs can help you to an extent, But if you don't win the rural votes in a place like the in a place like Virginia and Wisconsin, you're not going to get far. You're not going to be able to win those states if you're not able to garner enough support among the suburban and rural communities within Virginia and Wisconsin. Just look at how Ron Johnson and Glenn Youngkin have fared in their respective elections. They were able to pull out the more MAGA rural sections of the community while also bringing in the more neoconish establishmentarian parts of the suburbs. And here we have the voter trends of the Rio Grande Valley, similar to the Hidalgo County vote share, with Hoover, Eisenhower, Nixon, and Trump being the only Republicans winning that area throughout the past century. So, what do we learn from this? What we learned from this slide is political science is ever changing. If you don't understand how it works, it could be very detrimental to how you run your election, how you understand your community. Because if you don't know your community, you're not going to be able to win your election or even garner enough support to win a primary for that matter. What happened in the Rio Grande Valley personifies how politics can shift throughout America's political history. Because political trends, you have to be careful with how you do it because one policy change could be very detrimental to the voter base. If you alienate a specific policy that they rely heavily on, you might lose that voter base. And Kamala Harris didn't really make it any better. People say that she run a flawless campaign, but all people had to do was look at her past history as a San Francisco DA, attorney general, and senator from California, and they begin to realize that she's not going to be friendly to a lot of these social policies that the Rio Grande Valley aligns with greatly. And then you have these political strategists telling you something that Sheldon would say, like, don't you think that if I were wrong, I know it? Well, guess what? A lot of these political strategists are a bit delusional in their takes of understanding why communities trend left or right. And these same political strategists still claim that what happened in the Rio Grande Valley is a fluke. If it was a fluke, you wouldn't have Monica Dela Cruz doubling her margins against a progressive candidate that she beat back in 2022 by 8 points to now 18 in a Trump plus 3 seat in 2020 and a Trump plus, I think, 17 in 2024. And then you got Cuellar's seat, who he has been able to comfortably win in every election as he's more conservative on social issues, moderate on border security, and is fairly conservative on guns and oil. And I'll tell you this, in 2022, if he were to lose his Biden plus 7 seat to Jessica Cisneros, a known squad member